Democrats in Ohio and around the country have one question. What do we do now? Welcome to Columbus on the Record. In the history of big national presidential and vice presidential debates, there are moments that stand out. There is no Soviet domination of Eastern Europe. There you go again. You're no Jack Kennedy. And will you shut up, man? This moment joins them.
We'd be able to wipe out his debt. We'd be able to help make sure that all those things we need to do, child care, elder care, making sure that we continue to strengthen our health care system, making sure that we're able to make every single solitary person eligible for what I've been able to do with the COVID, with dealing with everything we have to do with, look, if we finally beat Medicare.
Thank you, President Biden. President Trump?
Well, he's right. He did beat Medicare. He beat it to death, and he's destroying Medicare because all of these people are coming in. They're putting them on Medicare. They're putting them on Social Security. They're going to destroy Social Security. This man is going to single-handedly destroy Social Security.
The fallout from Joe Biden's poor performance began before the debate ended, and despite former President Trump's repeated falsehoods, Joe Biden's halting presence threatens his presidency and the futures of Democrats down the ticket. Brian Rothenberg, what do you think Sherrod Brown is thinking right now?
Well, Sherrod Brown's thinking the same thing he's always thought, which is I'm going to campaign to Ohioans, and I'm going to campaign about Ohioans. He's always been able to cross through that, and that's why he's won even when the state has gone increasingly red. However, I would remind people you can't overreact in politics, as Mark knows. I mean, we had the Inside Edition issue and Republicans were faced with this a few years ago and everybody thought Trump was done. You just don't know what is going to happen in politics. And Trump didn't really get a bump here. I mean, you know, he told so many lies and was, exaggerating so much. I don't think he got anywhere either.
But, I mean, Joe Biden just looked awful. I think by all accounts, he just did not look good at all. And the doubts were he's too old, he's not up to the job, and he certainly didn't dispel those.
So he did there, but later on, today he looked pretty good. It's on Friday, and at the rally, and he's did pretty well in his State of the Union speech. Look, this is going to be the bottom line here is this election going to be about Donald Trump or is it going to be about Joe Biden? The issue for Joe Biden coming out of this, if he remains the nominee, is he's got to make it about Donald Trump. And some of the ridiculous things that Donald Trump said, like, if he didn't sleep with this porn star, then why in the world did you give her hundreds of thousands of dollars not to talk about it? I mean, that didn't make any sense. So,
Mark Weaver, incumbents, their first debate's always lousy. Generally, you can recover within a couple of weeks. Biden, if he goes in September, he's got a couple of months to let this linger. Can he recover from this?
This is not a one-off. Anyone who's been paying attention knows that he's been in cognitive decline for years. I've been observing Joe Biden since the 1980s. I'm from the greater Philadelphia area originally. He was a senator from Delaware. He was very sharp in his prime. I disagreed with him politically, but he was very sharp in his prime. So we saw him as he really is, unscripted, and he's not running the executive branch. The staff is running the executive branch. And last night, a lot of people who don't pay attention to politics like we do around the table, people realized it, and you can't come back from that.
What's been the reaction, Joe, in the Ohio Democratic circles?
Well, in Ohio Democratic circles, I think people are willing to kind of sit back and do what, at least publicly do what Brian's suggesting, just kind of, see if he tackles back. But there's a concern. But I think, when you look at what people have said today, and from all stripes, political stripes, a lot of people are saying, hey, is this the best we can do? Because Trump wasn't great either. I mean, both of them really had a lot of problems. I mean, there were a lot of mistruths that were stated. No one really performed well. So, I mean, I think a lot of people were kind of taken back by that, really.
I think the frustration, Andrew, was that Trump was saying things that were false or half true or something that was open to debate, and Biden did not fight back at all.
Yeah, it seemed like the moderators didn't really want to make themselves the story, and they kind of just let things go. And so, to your point, I mean, that would be Biden's role potentially in there if he wants to kind of push back. And yeah, it was. I mean, the clip was one of the worst moments of the debate, but it was, not an unrepresentative one either.
So, getting back to Sherrod Brown, Brian, he's sort of put himself a little bit of distance between himself and Joe Biden, pointing out how he's disagreed with him in cases in the past. Does he come out and say that Joe Biden shouldn't be the nominee? Does he really give him the firm stiff arm?
I don't think Joe Biden is part of his campaign. To be honest with you, we're not. There's really no presidential campaign to speak of here right now on either side. His campaign has been primarily on the Senate side. It's primarily, his basic blue collar message that is appealing to some of the folks that actually do vote for Trump. There will be Trump Sherrod Brown voters. There always have been, and there will continue to be. The big issue for him after today is just making sure there's turnout. But he always had that problem because the presidential election really isn't spending any money here. So for him, it's stay the course, make sure there's turnout of your base, and continue the message that is Sherrod Brown, which is a populist message and a blue collar message.
Up until this week, we saw Sherrod Brown jogging away from Joe Biden. This week, he's sprinting away from Joe Biden. Sherrod Brown knows Ohio has changed in the 50 years he's been in Ohio politics. He will lose the Mahoning Valley. He will only win the inner city cores. He's in real danger this year. And if he runs in the same ticket with Joe Biden, he knows that that's going to hurt him.
Well, I'm not sure about Mahoning Valley. We saw that congressional race a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, that's a special election. And if Tim Ryan, who's from the Valley and did a Sherrod Brown impression in the Valley, couldn't win the Valley, Sherrod Brown is not going to win the Valley.
Sherrod Brown, the first time he talks to reporters, is going to get one question, Joe, and that is, should Biden be the nominee?
Yeah, he's going to get that question. I don't know if he'll answer it publicly, but
so actually,
we'll be asking.
He did get that question today.
He already got it? Okay.
I did, yeah. And I saw a clip, and he kind of pivoted away. One of his answers that he'll say is, if he doesn't want to talk about something, is, I'm not going to engage in punditry. So that's one of the things he said. It sounded like the question was framed as if, Sherrod, would you like to run for president, and something like that. And so he doesn't want to do that, but he dodged the question.
Brian, do you see any scenario where Biden withdraws?
I think the only scenario there would be if the polling shows that and if the fundraising shows that and enough people say something. And I also think it gets down to the battleground states if that were to happen, and you'd be seeing whatever candidates they're looking at coming from battleground states, Gretchen Whitmer in Michigan, possibly the governor of North Carolina who's retiring. You would probably be looking at sort of a pinpointed way to do that. It's never happened before, but in the last 12 years, we've never seen a lot of things happen in politics, and they've happened.
We're 2 or 3 steps down the road, but would that help or hurt Donald Trump if they were to change horses, the Democrats, at this late of the stage?
Depends on who it is. If it's Kamala Harris, it would help him because she might be even more disliked than Joe Biden. When Biden first put the debate stunt out there to Trump, I quietly thought to myself, that was smart. He set his own terms. Trump had said anywhere, anytime. And so the Biden team, I thought, strategically made a good move there. But what they didn't realize is if their guy fails in June and he doesn't have another chance until early October or late September, it'll be a summer's worth of impressions. That's what happened, and now they're hitting themselves in the head for doing it.
All right. Last weekend, up to 4 gunmen shot 10 people on the sidewalk in the Short North. A day later, a drive-by shooting in Dayton left 1 person dead and 6 others wounded. The mass shootings have brought familiar calls: more policing, tougher penalties for juvenile offenders, more parental involvement, and tougher gun laws. Columbus police promise a much more visible police presence this weekend in the Short North to try to prevent a repeat occurrence. Mark Weaver, of all those things, is there any one thing, any 2 things, a combination that could really sort of stop these shootings from occurring?
As you know, I've been a part-time prosecutor now for 23 years here in Ohio. There are already lots of guns in this country, largely because the Second Amendment permits it. And so there's plenty of gun laws that ought to be enforced. What we're not doing is we're taking the people who choose to shoot at one another and not putting them behind bars for long periods of time. There's a small subset of the population that's willing to try to shoot one another, and by putting them away for a long time, it makes the rest of us safer. That's the strongest of all of the solutions you mentioned or we're talking about, but locking up people who are violent felons who are willing to shoot one another is probably the strongest solution.
Brian, after the recent police shootings and talk of parole and using parole as a revenue generator. There was some softening on putting people behind bars while they wait for trial. Should society rethink that?
You know, this is a yo-yo effect. I remember back in the Gene Watts days in the Senate when it was, three times and throw away the key, basically, and then that got, changed. The problem is really simple when it comes to gun laws. You have a right to the Second Amendment. You don't have a right to shoot and kill innocent people. And also, one of the biggest mistakes this state ever made is when they made this uniformity among every county and every place, because what's happened is, you want to be out in Madison County and you want to shoot a gun, that's one thing. People are far apart. You want to permit the same way in a populated area, it affects things. And there was another shooting too we're not even talking about, and that is up where I was press secretary up in Cleveland at Edgewater Park, where they have the big fireworks. That was a huge shooting over there. It is an epidemic, and it is time for the legislature to stop loosening these regulations and do something. Governor DeWine called on something to happen. It never happened.
Yeah, it was 5 years ago, almost 5 years ago, in 2019, the mass shooting in Dayton that killed 9 people, Andrew, with a Do Something rally afterwards. But gun laws actually got looser in that time.
Yeah, this topic comes up, unfortunately, frequently. And when you look at the legislative outlook, if the question is there likely to be any gun restrictions passed in the legislature, the answer is no. Republicans are opposed to that. They control the legislature. And I've come to view if people want to know, like, is there a chance of this happening? And I've begun to think that ballot issues are more likely. There's not really a precedent for it recently, but I've kind of picked up on interest in it. So that's just, whether or not that actually happens, but if that's something that people want to pursue, that seems like the most likely route.
This happened before in the Short North about a year ago. Mm-hmm. The mayor had a lot of news conferences. He actually asked businesses to close at midnight during 1 or 2 weekends, not this year, this time. But in the week before this, there were 7 or 8 people killed in Columbus in different shootings. Mm-hmm. The Short North just gets a lot more attention.
It does, and I think it's because there's a lot more money down there, a lot more people come into that area. It gets tourism that some of the other areas that have high crime or higher crime don't get. But the thing is that Andrew's right. It's something that there's a shooting, and we pay attention to it for a few days, and then it goes away. And then it's cyclical. And this legislature has said, I don't see any sign that it will change. The legislature has said we respect gun rights. We are not going to do gun reforms that have been proposed by the other side. And so at this point, the only thing that could be done is actually enforcing the gun laws that are on the books. And so maybe we'll start to see, as I think Mark suggested, that you'd have more people put behind bars, but even that has problems. There's another side, What
about policing, Mark? The Columbus police, they were there. They've had a larger presence there in the past. They'll have a much larger one this weekend. They took criticism for not having the helicopter ready to chase the car that apparently was the getaway car. Can you police your way out of this and prevent this kind of shooting?
Well, I advise a lot of police organizations, and what they say behind closed doors is when the politicians don't have their back, the rank and file are less likely to go further than they need to on the street, because they know that if they make a mistake, which everyone makes a mistake in their job, that they won't have the backing of the politicians. And so in towns where police are backed up by the leadership, you see more rigorous law enforcement, you see better law enforcement. Where politicians are willing to throw cops who did their best under the bus, you have lax law enforcement and you have more crime.
All right. The National Transportation Safety Board has finished its investigation into last year's train derailment and chemical leak and fire in East Palestine. The NTSB cast a wide net of blame. It found fault with badly designed rail cars, faulty sensors on the rails, insufficient railroad staff that led to a missed warning. And maybe the biggest mistake of all, they may not have had to deliberately burn the chemicals in the cars, sending toxic smoke into the air. The railroad continues to defend that decision, saying it was necessary to prevent the cars from exploding. Andrew Tobias, very extensive report, a lot of blame to be cast around. What happens now? What do you think is going to happen with railway safety and whatever happened to prevent this from happening in the future.
Yeah, one of the more interesting things politically happening in Ohio is that Sherrod Brown and J.D. Vance, the Republican and Democratic senators from Ohio, are working on a bill together that would, I don't know if it would have prevented this exactly, but it's the idea is to take lessons from it and just basically like toughen regulations on the railroad industry. And it kind of moved and it died. But you heard initially after this report that there was maybe movement happening that again. It sounds like Vance is pushing for it. And so there's a question where do Republicans want to give Sherrod Brown a bipartisan win when he's running for re-election? If J.D. Vance, in fact, ends up becoming Donald Trump's running mate, who knows if that will happen? Do Democrats want to hand him a bipartisan victory? So the politics are complicated, but it's just interesting to me that that there's a serious push on that bill at all, and I guess we'll see whether it actually moves forward or not.
But it hasn't really gone anywhere. The power of the railway union, not union, but the companies.
Yeah, and it's not just the Senate, even in the House. Amelia Sykes is working with another Republican congressman here to do the same thing, and it's not moving there either. So, I mean, those continue to be issues. I think that the company, was not able to give sufficient advice to the governors of two states, Republican and Democrat, when they decided to blow that up. And just this week, by the way, there's two Supreme Court decisions that'll make that even weaker. One is, today's decision in the Supreme Court that loosens rulemaking could actually make it so that companies don't have to give you that information as much because it's changed the fundamental background of that. And then the other decision, of course, is about EPA and where, the air pollution goes on things like that. So
Hindsight's always 20/20, Mark, but there was evidence that maybe they didn't have to set these cars on fire to burn off the chemicals before they exploded. Norfolk Southern was pushing for it. The chemical company says they weren't consulted or weren't consulted enough. Who gets the blame for that decision? Because ultimately it was government officials, the governor and local officials who made that call.
You started where I would end, which is hindsight is 20/20. And had that train car exploded before it had the controlled release, and had the shrapnel from that moved out and killed or injured somebody, there would be a report about how negligent that was. And so we ask our leaders to make tough decisions, and then they step up and they make them, and then we're often quick to criticize them, and that's fair. But hindsight is 20/20.
What are the lessons we learned from this, do you think, Joe? Is it railway safety? Is it, suddenly we're paying attention to this tiny little village in far eastern Ohio on the river that may not have gotten the attention 10 years ago.
Yeah, and I'm not sure that there's been lessons learned from it, to be quite honest, because if you look at what's been happening there, there's still so many questions and so many different ways to cast the blame that no one has really come up with a plan that deals with all of the problems that have been caused by this incident. People can't, their homes, they can't sell their homes, the value of the homes. There's a lot of questions up there, and I don't know that there's a game plan yet to tackle all of it.
There's some criticism that I think J.D. Vance had this week, Andrew, that the government may have settled too early with Norfolk Southern. They should have waited until this report came out. Would that have made a difference, do you think? Because the settlement was pretty large.
Yeah, it's really hard for me to evaluate that because I wasn't involved with negotiating it. But for instance, the report said that a particular type of car that they were using was more dangerous, and I forget the details of why. But the government's not outlawing that car, for example. So whether they could have had a stronger position if they had this information, it's hard to say. But I think it's like a fair question to scrutinize whether or not what is being done is strong enough, just because you have clear examples of problems that are not specifically being addressed by a new regulation or law.
Brian, is this just an accident and accidents happened?
accidents do happen. They always happen in leadership, and they happen even in industry, like when I worked for the UAW. The issue is how you deal with it and what the information you get, what best information you have. And one thing that is missing in this is getting companies to be forthright and ready in a situation like this with the people that have to make the decisions. I've seen this before. I've seen it actually even in issues of industrial accidents in plants. And it's important. It's one of those things that is important for government to do, is to regulate and make sure corporations are being transparent about what they're dealing with.
Getting back to the East Palestine, this tiny little village that really became a spotlight of the world for a month or so when this all happened, Mark, is that going to happen again, do you think? Is that always, if this happened in a big city like New York, Washington, D.C., San Francisco would have been huge. But now East Palestine, this tiny little village, the world's media was there watching this and has followed it for the past year to see what happened.
The lens of the media will move on, but we hopefully will have the lessons remembered. We want to make sure there's justice in every individual instance, but the long sweep of history, industry does improve. We think of the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire 100 years ago,
in New York City,
where the fire exits were blocked, and now we all know not to do that. And so it doesn't help the immediate problem, but in the long sweep of history, you learn from it. Lawyers bring lawsuits, judgments are paid, and hopefully safety regulations are improved.
All right. Our final topic, it looks like any efforts to regulate what happens on state public college and university campuses will have to wait until the next legislative session. A Senate bill that would have banned diversity, equity, and inclusion training at public colleges will not come to a vote in the House. The bill would also require intellectual diversity when teaching topics like abortion, marriage, and elections. The bill has passed the Senate, and supporters now say they will wait to see if there is a new speaker in the next legislative session before trying to win passage in the House. Meanwhile, the House has passed a bill that requires colleges to put systems in place to fight racial, ethnic, and religious harassment and intimidation. Joe Ingles, this bill, which has been talked about for months, appears dead for now. The Senate bill that would have eliminated or banned DEI training.
Yes, it didn't advance, and as you said, the other bill did, and now there's a question, do you even need the bill? Because some lawmakers, including State Senator Matt Dolan, have said, you know, there are other things in this other bill that kind of, you know, accomplish the same thing. So there's a certain contingent of the legislature who's saying, let's step back, let's see how this is implemented, see where the holes are, and if we need to address it later, let's address it later. But there are concerns that the initial bill that you're talking about, which was sponsored by Senator Jerry Serino, that bill, there are concerns that it goes too far and it could actually hurt some of the programming that Ohio State and other presidents have used to try to deal with problems on their campuses.
Is that why it didn't go any further, Andrew? Because it's a very conservative legislature. DEI programs are not popular among conservative Republicans. And this seemed like a pretty straightforward ban on those happening on campuses. There was a lot of push for that around the country, but it didn't happen here in the House.
Yeah, there are a lot of parts to that bill, and so one of the initial concerns from an early version had to do with collective bargaining rights for college professors. The teachers' unions have more sway with the House Republican caucus because of just the way that coalitions have worked out and stuff like that. They've left that aside, but I know that those groups continue to have those types of concerns. But there's other elements of the bill. You mentioned there's an element where there's concerns about anti-Semitism in light of the Israel-Palestine conflict. There's elements that have to do with whether conservative thought is encouraged at the universities, but there's a separate bill that got passed in the budget last year that sets up essentially conservative think tanks in the public universities. So you do see some of the individual elements that kind of underpin the bill being passed in other piecemeal forms, but fundamentally, there's a lot of stuff in there. There's, just obviously not interest in the House in moving forward. I don't completely know why, because it's been a lot and there's a lot of different elements to it. But you at least do see parts of this getting passed in other pieces of legislation too.
Brian, is this a case where the threat of legislation forced colleges to change how they do business, and that they're afraid this bill becoming law, so they said, okay, let's tone things down a bit?
There is a little bit of a chilling effect, but I wish some of the Republican conservatives would be as worried about the First Amendment as they are the Second Amendment. Perhaps the answer, Andrew, is if they put a transgender professor in charge of it, they would wind up passing it, because this legislature seems intent on just picking on trans people in this state. For instance, one thing we're not talking about is that for 220 years in this state, teachers have been allowed to give hall passes to bathrooms and regulate the bathrooms in their schools. However, the House managed to find a way to mandate where trans people can go to the bathroom.
Mark, where does this go? Should it go anywhere? Legislating how courses are taught and how employees are trained on campus.
This particular measure has slowed down less about the merits of it than more about the logjam in the House that's happening for other reasons. There is broad support in this legislature for doing away with any teaching that falsely says that one race of people is the oppressed and another race of the people is the oppressors. And this legislature will act on that particular thing.
Let's get to our final off-the-record parting shots, and Mark Weaver, you're up first.
J.D. Vance's stock is going up as Trump's VP pick. If he becomes the VP, Mike DeWine gets to choose his seat. DeWine's choice will be this: put somebody in there who will run again, like a Timken or a Matt Dolan, Jane Timken or Matt Dolan, or put in a caretaker, maybe like a Jim Hoops, the Dean of the House, who will just hold that seat for 3 years and allow others get to run.
All right, Brian.
There's a great program that's about to be unveiled this month. OSU has been working with Herschel Craig, who is an underrated state senator, to open a dental clinic in the inner city in Columbus, and I think it's a good example of bipartisan work and good positive work.
Andrew.
So Wednesday is the deadline for state ballot issues to submit their signatures. We have one group, which is the Redistricting Reform Amendment, saying they have around 715,000 signatures. That's more than the abortion rights campaign last year had when they successfully got on the ballots themselves. So it looks good for them, but they need to get something like 413,000 to make the ballot. And so the other campaign, the $15 minimum wage thing, is more of a question mark, but we'll know on Wednesday.
And Joe.
And just to tag on to that, because that was kind of my final thought too, they're going to turn in those petition signatures on Monday, and we are told that this is going to be substantial and that people are behind it, so get ready for an ad war on TV.
Speaking of ballot issues that were successful, it is ComFest weekend in Columbus, and now that it is legal, thanks to voters, I predict marijuana will fill the air at the annual gathering, just like it has every year since 1972. That is Columbus on the Record for this week. Please enjoy responsibly and continue the conversation on Facebook. And you can watch us anytime on your time at our website, wosu.org/COTR. We're also on YouTube and the PBS video app. For our crew and our panel, I'm Mike Thompson. Have a good week.